Hello and welcome to November's All the Everything. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And a big hello if you're here watching me live. Hello if you're watching the video replay on Facebook or YouTube. And hello also if you are listening to this on the podcast. I think that's all the different ways you could possibly be consuming this right now. And whatever way you are, I appreciate you. So I've just come out of doing the pre-show party into our lovely Facebook group, and my goodness, I love it so much. Every month when I do it, I think this is one of the most just joyful things I do in terms of creating, and it's just always so valuable to get the opportunity to have a conversation about these things before I start to then share on them. So if you haven't joined us before in the Facebook group for the pre-show party, I really recommend you do so next month, which is crazy. How can next month be December? That is weird. That is very weird. So we today are going to be talking about the topic of cultivating energy, the way to be your full expression in the world. Incredibly juicy topic. Before we do that, I'm going to share what I've been consuming and creating over the last month. Because I've already been online for quite a while, I'm going to make this a bit shorter than perhaps I normally do. Although I say that and then I tend to make it just as long. That's not my intention though. So what I've been consuming in this last month, two things pop into my mind. One of them is a TV show, and I never know what channels I watch anything on because my husband just finds it and lines it up. It may be Netflix, but really don't know. And it's Ted Lasso. And when he first said it, it was like, no, I hate the name. No, I hate football. And oh my goodness, I love it so much. It's the vibe of it. So it's about an American football manager. I may have all the terms wrong because I genuinely don't know anything about really any sports at all. And I particularly dislike football. But yeah, so I think it's an American football manager has come to the UK and is the manager of a English football team, which obviously you call soccer in America. And anyway, it's just got the most beautiful energy, funny enough, to it. It reminds me, it's a very different kind of show, but energetically, it really reminds me of Schitt's Creek. And if you haven't watched Schitt's Creek, you definitely need to go and watch that. And I'm super jealous because, you know, it's like when you've watched something or read something and it's just been the best thing ever. And then someone has never even done that yet. So if you've not watched Schitt's Creek yet, I'm really jealous, but go do that and then go watch Ted Lasso. I wouldn't say necessarily Ted Lasso is as good, but Schitt's Creek is epic, but it's definitely got that same very positive, makes it sound cheesy, but just, you know, like silly things happen, people aren't particularly nice, but you kind of come away with this real kind of feel good, you know, people are actually lovely kind of feeling to it. So if you would like something to watch, I would recommend that. I guess I probably ought to be making some amazing message out of it, but actually I wasn't going to, I was just going to move on to the next thing. But the thing I really love about it, apart from everything already said, is Ted Lasso, the main character, is such a good example of really sovereignty. And it takes a while to really see that in him because he's just got this very joyous, nothing really gets to him way that can make him initially seem maybe a little bit weak, but he really isn't. And the more I've watched it, the more I've thought he is actually a really good example of sovereignty. You know, such a force of good in the world. You know, we talk sometimes about a good king or queen energetically embodies power, grace, and love. And yeah, he does that in spades. So that's also why I'd recommend watching it. He's actually archetypally a really good embodiment of the king. And then the other thing I wanted to recommend is, I shared this with the Waking Wild's Feminine Circle on Tuesday, it's this book. If you're watching, you're going to have to see it. If not, I'm going to read it out. It's Rescuing the Light, and it's quotes from the oral teachings of Martin is pronounced actually, Martin Prechtel, who is an amazing shaman. And it is just the most beautiful book. It's one of those ones, so it's all just, if you're watching again, you can see just like little quotes from his teachings, as it said. And I'll read this one out. It's just a random one. When you sneak around and try to get away with your life, you lose your soul. Then your body just becomes a shuttle bus for the ghosts of other stingy people who did the same thing. Whoa, kind of relevant to this show, actually. But there's just some really, really wise and beautiful and yeah, just so many gorgeous ones. So if you're new to Martin Prechtel, I just, his work's gorgeous. I shared his talk, something like on grief and praise, into the group before, and it's by the same person, and yeah, his work is just lovely. So that's the other thing I've been consuming. And then what have I been creating? So the main creation, apart from the ongoing work of Waking Our Feminine, so we're about halfway through, but I think I talked about that last month, so I'm not going to go into that this time. So really the focus has been on creating the new evolution of Waking Wild Sovereign, which starts in a couple of weeks. So it's now full. We know who's going to be joining us, pretty much. Just kind of like there's a last place that we're in conversation with, but it's energetically, it's there. And excuse me, Watson. Sorry, my dog's kicking his beanbag around. And really starting to create that as, I guess, its own spirit. That's what I notice more and more these days, as we've been doing all these different crucibles of Waking the Wild. Each of them has their own spirit. They all bring something else, and it always feels as though this isn't just of our making. For example, this Waking Our Feminine, it isn't my creation alone. It feels very much like it has its own spirit that has been, you know, wanted to be birthed. And each Waking Wild Feminine has got its own spirit. And then, of course, Waking Wild Sovereign has got its own spirit. And this particular Waking Wild Sovereign, because it very much has this, it is a new evolution, it has its like a kind of like completely new energetic, particularly as this one's going to have a sovereign circle. We're going to bring the sovereigns together, which, you know, wow, the power that is going to be in that virtual room when those sovereigns circle. So it's going to be, I think, really symbolically a real kind of emblem or marker of where we are. When I recorded the podcast earlier, I was talking about it, saying, you know, Waking Wild Sovereign really is the jewel in our crown, and it feels as though this evolution of it is going to be a jewel that is like that much more magnificent. So yeah, that's been a real creation of the heart that's ongoing, and of course will be ongoing for the next 6 months or so as we're in the creation of it with those sovereigns. The other thing, very briefly, I want to share is something I do often, which is the creation of ceremony. And I did a very particular ceremony today, which I'm not going to share the details with you, but I'll share that it was a ceremony in honor of the masculine, honor of the divine masculine. And I actually invited the women in Waking Wild Feminine into the same ceremony individually. They're all across the world, literally. And I know many of them did take part. And it felt it was the same ceremony, or a version of the same ceremony that I did on this day last year. And so it was really interesting me to notice the changes in me. So I did it in the same place, same tree, the same intention. And it really was an example for me of where I am now, how I've changed since the last time I did that ceremony a year ago. So something, I suppose that's the same with all those traditions that we create. We don't always name them as ceremonies or rituals, but things that we are doing every year really are a form of ceremony or ritual. And the more intention we can bring to that, the more we have the opportunity to create something powerful from it. And also, again, have the opportunity to see how we've expanded in our being since the last time we created that. So it's something for today, like literally that was this morning, that really I could say has probably been one of, if not the most important creation of my month. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick sip of my tea, and then we're going to jump into the main topic: cultivating energy, the way to be your full expression in the world. So energy, what a word, what a word. I've noticed over the last few months, the topics that have been selected, each time the words have always been words that kind of come with a lot of baggage. There are lots of definitions, a lot of, I guess, people might have a reaction to them, and energy, like, my goodness, that's definitely the case for. And I've been chuckling to myself because having come from a really hippie upbringing, a very hippie kind of background, always reminds me of that kind of stereotypical, it's all energy man. And as with so many things, what I've realized, and I can say this now because my dad's dead and isn't around to say I told you so, not that he probably would anyway, but I've realized with so many things that the hippies as a kind of collective were about and were bringing into the world, there was so much they were right about. That's what I've just noticed more and more as I've, I guess, stopped rebelling to my hippie childhood, because I kind of, like, as a weird rebellion, I actually went kind of like really straight and normal and mainstream. And then as I've kind of like come back from that rebellion, I realize how much I'm now living my life in a way that's very, very similar to my upbringing, very similar to my father and his kind of group of friends. It's not very different, quite honestly, which is so funny to realize, like, I've had to kind of go through my whole journey to write back and like, oh my goodness, they had it right all along. So energy is definitely one of those things that the hippies seem to me to be right about. So my question to you, before I start to dive in, I'd love to know, and do feel free to come back and share this in the group. If you're, just listening at home, just take a moment, just tune in. What does energy mean to you? Because you'll have, I suspect, your own sense of it. And I think you'll get more out of this show if you've engaged yourself into that inquiry, if you're entering into it in this kind of co-creative way. So make a note if you've got a pen or something, or if not, just take a moment to go inwards. What does energy mean to you? What does the word energy evoke? And I'll share some of the things that were shared in the group in the pre-show party. The word life force was shared, which I think is a really good way of describing. It's a hard word, isn't it, to define, I'd say. And then I think I've lost the other one I meant to make a note of, but it was something like there's a kind of daily energy, like the amount of energy you have to get about the day. And then there was something deeper, something that feels like it comes from soul. So I would love to know, what does it mean to you? And then the next question, what challenges do you have? What challenge do you notice when it comes to energy? And again, just take a moment, like, again, feel free if you're want to share this afterwards, please do. It makes for a really great conversation in the Facebook group. But even if you just want to do this for yourself, just take a moment to check in. What challenges are showing up for you? And I'll share again some of the ones that were shared in the pre-show party. And I think some of these really do speak to challenges that we do have culturally. I don't think these are individual challenges. I think these are cultural challenges. So I find it is hard to create my vision when my energy is tired. Energy still feels like something that lacks, but it's getting better the more I connect to soul. I find it challenging to be in other people's energy when they're projecting their shadow onto those around them. I have a strong practice of self-care. So when I'm challenged with the negative energy, I want to run for the hills. This is another one that references human design. I'm a big fan of human design, so this is an interesting take on this. I've no defined energy centers regarding human design, so it makes sense that who I'm with alters my energy. And last one, and I think this again is a really common one. I work with young people and I'm around a lot of negative energy, mental health related, extreme life challenges. I find that at work, I have an abundance of energy to support my young people, and then I'm zapped from having no energy left for myself. It's hard to keep my energy balanced. So they are, again, I think very culturally relevant challenges. So as I often do, when I looked up in the dictionary to see what the dictionary definition would be, and I took a few because I find it interesting to sort of see how this might show up in different ways. And so here's a few. The impetus behind all motion and all activity, the capacity for vigorous activity, available power, an adequate or abundant amount of such power. And I really noticed, I wasn't expecting actually the word power to be used in the definition, but it actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. And certainly in shamanism, the word power is the word that's used a lot. A lot of the focus is around power. And so it makes complete sense that really that's what's being spoken about is energy. And why it's so important is because whether we use the word energy or power, it is of vital importance to humans living life well. So I wasn't expecting that, but it makes complete sense that power is another word really for it, a synonym for energy. And I'm probably likely to be using those two words, energy and power, interchangeably. So if you notice me saying one, it's just whatever's showing up for me. And really, I'm meaning the same thing by it. Of course, I think when we talk about power in relation to humans, I think we often think of it more as in like personal power, in a way that we perhaps don't, or maybe we do. I think when we talk about it as humans, I think we do see there's a distinction between energy and power, but I don't think that distinction is necessarily true or useful. But let's see where we arrive at as we explore, and whether maybe there's places where that is true. But I think certainly culturally we see them very differently, and I don't think they actually are different, or at least as different as we believe they are. So I think it's fairly clear that without enough power or energy, we're really going to struggle to do very much at all, let alone, as the topic of this show is talking about, let alone be our full expression in the world. So I'm assuming this topic was chosen by our Facebook group members because one way or another, we recognize there is a real link between our energy, the cultivation of it, and how much, to what degree we are then able to be this full expression into the world. So I'm really intending to make this maybe a more practical show than I may normally. Again, it feels to me this is something I could talk about energy in all sorts of ways. I could talk about it from a metaphysical sense. I could talk about it from, I guess, like masculine, feminine energies. There's so many different ways we can talk about energy. And I actually noticed, I was saying in the pre-show party, since this topic's been chosen, I notice how much I actually do talk about energy. It probably shows up, I don't know, in how many conversations every single day. And of course, there are so many different ways I could talk about it, but I'm really going to focus in this show in really looking at how we can cultivate energy to be our full expression. So I'm not going to really go broad with this. I really want to focus on something that is actually very practical and helpful in you being able to be your full expression. So the first part is, I would say, probably the trickiest part, or certainly the part that can take us the longest. I'm going to start there because it's simplest, but it is definitely, it's really the deep work. So it's being able to become the kind of cleanest or most open channel for energy to come through us. Whether or not we see that as, I mean, I certainly see it as like, this is not personal energy. This very much is energy that we could describe as coming from spirit, whatever your beliefs are, insert the word you prefer instead of spirit. But very much, this isn't something that's stored in our bodies. It's something that streams through us. And the more we are becoming this clean channel for it, the more we have available. And what that looks like is integrating what's in the way of that, and which is including integrating what's held in shadow, which again can sound like it's personal power, and this stuff is kind of paradoxical really. But what we have put away into shadow, and if when I'm talking about shadow you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, we've done lots of shows before, so we'll make sure we link to those. But really, that availability of power that we have has been pushed away out of the system. So in Jungian terms, would call that shadow. In shamanic terms, would call it like parts of our soul have been lost. But ultimately, it's access to power that is currently out of our reach to use in conscious ways, to use in ways that are aligned with our soul. So that's the work, which again really is the deep work, is the great work of being able to bring this into conscious alignment, back into the whole. And I'm not going to go into how we do that, because again, that's something I've talked about on previous shows, but that really seems to me to be the work in order for us to be this most open channel for that, as allowing as much energy to be within our conscious use. That's what it involves. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what happens when we're not that in a moment. But that for me is kind of like, without that, we're always going to be working with a kind of like limitation, this kind of closing effect on how much energy we have to use. The other part of this is, the more we're living life in the kind of just like foundational ways that are aligned to us. And some of those are going to be ways that are aligned to us as humans. These are our needs that we share as humans, as primal needs in terms of fresh air, fresh water, food, those kinds of things. So we share these primal human needs that are really important for us to, again, maintain having the right amount of energy. And then as well as that, we're going to have individual needs. The clearer we are on those individual needs, the more likely we are going to be able to meet them and therefore have the amount of energy that's aligned for us. Sorry, my dog's barking. And so talking personally, this is by no means me saying this is a prescription. There is no dogma in what I'm about to share at all. For me personally, I've been, I think, very fortunate that I was raised in a way that actually was very in alignment for me. And if I talk particularly about food, I was raised as a vegetarian from birth. I've been vegan now for 26 years coming up. And it happens, I mean, I chose it. I mean, obviously I didn't choose it when I was a baby. And then at various points, I've chosen it for ethical reasons. now it's not even really a choice. It just suits my system. It's not even really something I even consider. It's just how I live. And I know intuitively it really serves me. It allows me to be in my full energy. That's not to say being vegan is going to have the same effect on everyone else. That just happens to be an example of my own individual way of aligning with those foundational needs that works really, really well for me. So I would really suggest experimenting, really allow yourself to be guided by intuition as to what those things are for you, because I really believe they are the kind of low-hanging fruit, really. I think because we've got so little understanding of the, I guess, bigger prize on offer in our culture, we put so much focus there, like, you know, to an obsessive degree, which actually can be the book Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani is a great example of this, where she shares this hyper focus on health and eating the right things to the point where that focus in itself is detrimental and actually creates this separation from herself, this real like disease, literally and physically. Doesn't make sense, you know what I mean. And so I think culturally, because we don't understand all the other things we could be doing, we put so much focus on that, which really does not seem helpful from the results that we witness. So really recognize there's going to be the primal human needs, which are generally fairly obvious, albeit often quite neglected. Then you're going to have those individual needs and hold them lightly. They're likely not to be particularly out there or complex. And the more you're able to just listen inwards, forget the dogma, forget the latest fad, forget what someone else's view is, like just notice, how does this feel for me? And the more and more we're used to being guided by that, it's very clear. Like I noticed my daughter bought some vegan brownies earlier and was offering me some. And it was just so clear to me, like, no, there's no desire in my body at all for them. And more and more, and funny enough, I did a video into the Wake and More Feminine group earlier about intuition. Like more and more, I can just get an answer so clearly about any topic. But when it comes to food, when people are in this kind of, should I eat it? Should I not eat it? Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? So much of the time, if we look inwards, we wouldn't actually know. And it won't be a hard decision. It will just be there and obvious. So that's the first thing. Become the most open channels you can be. And again, one of those things is fairly simple, albeit not always the easiest thing to put in place, which is live in those ways that are aligned for you. The second thing is, again, that ongoing work of finding what's been in shadow and doing the work to bring it back into the whole. Then we can do the work of expanding our capacity. And I'm talking about these different things as if they are completely separate. There's definitely overlap between all the different things I'm going to talk about, but I think it's helpful to sort of see them as these different aspects so I can speak about them specifically. So expanding our capacity to hold more energy, to be able to have more power in the system. And part of that is nervous system training, which can come in many different forms, but the thing that's in common is to allow yourself to be with greater and greater amounts of creative tension in your system, but not so much that you're going to fry it and burn out. There's definitely a real awareness and discernment needed, where we recognize that just jumping out of a situation because we've got a lot of sensation isn't going to help expand our system, and going too full on, even when we've got a lot of, I don't know, that could show up in our system as tension or stress or fear. Just notice there's a place where that's not going to be helpful, and we may need to like take a little bit of a step back, go rest, go do something else. So just notice. But that is one of the simplest things I could recommend to anyone. Recognize if you are going to want to create things that are in alignment for you in the world, they're going to require stepping out of what you already know and do. They're going to require moving beyond a comfort zone, which, because of the word comfort, suggests it's comfortable. It's not having any kind of real effect on your nervous system. In order to create beyond that, we are going to have to step out of that comfort zone into a discomfort zone, into the unknown, into what's new. And for almost all of us, that's not going to be something we're necessarily going to enjoy. It's going to, again, drive up sensation that we then have the invitation to be with. The more we do that, it's like our nervous system then expands to that. It's going to be easier if you're watching this than hearing it, but I'm trying to say the words as I do my hands. It's like our nervous system grows to then meet the place we're now living from. And then, of course, we have the invitation to then do the same thing again, create again outside of our comfort zone. Our nervous system then has to be in that sensation, all that tension that's driven up by being in this new place. And then our nervous system expands so that then becomes comfortable. And so we'll notice we've all got examples of this where, I don't know, talking about me personally, going back how many years ago I first started to do shows like this. Initially, there was a whole lot of sensation. My nervous system really didn't enjoy it. And as time went on, my nervous system learned to be with that, expanded to hold that tension to the point where there was so much space there. There is none now. If I do any kind of show like this, I may have a bit of excitement, but there's no kind of fear driven up. It doesn't really feel like I'm doing anything that's outside of my comfort zone. I have other examples that I'm now moving into, but in terms of me recording a show, that is now within my comfort zone because my nervous system has expanded to include that. So that again can't come without us being willing to be in that sensation so that our nervous system can be trained in it. And again, I'm really saying that with the recognition that culturally we can sometimes we'll tend to go too far one end of the pole or the other. We'll either be very averse to being in that tension and we'll choose out of anything that drives it up. But the other end really isn't serving either. That's that kind of like go, 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 drive, results in lots of burnout. So really this is, again, recognizing where you are, what you're able to be with in a way that isn't burning you out, isn't frying your nervous system to the point where you then have to kind of like collapse and do all sorts of things to be able to cope, numbing it out and all things like that. So just notice, like, play with it, feel how much you can be with, and allow yourself to trust that if you're doing something that is soul aligned, which is something I'm going to speak about a bit in a moment, it's for you. It isn't something that you're doing that's misaligned. Therefore, there is, I guess, an energy that comes because of that will be sustaining. So that, I hope, makes sense. And again, it's, I guess, one of those things that I really wish I'd known when I was younger. I think I was typically a kind of one end of the shadow pole or the other and had no real understanding this was something I could actually consciously choose and play with and practice to create that expansion. The other thing that is kind of related, but I think is worth speaking about as a separate thing. And I mentioned at the start of the show how really probably the most important thing I created this month was the ceremony this morning. When we choose into initiations, which include ceremonies, we choose into a particular kind of initiation. Within that, there's definitely going to be aspects that are going to drive up that tension. But there is also something beyond that. When we create a ceremony with full intention, we're doing it from a place of expanding into a new reality, a new way of being. It's something that we're speaking out as, this is now what I'm deciding. It's a creation of reality in that moment that may take time to kind of ripple out into the material, but we are creating that kind of new shape of our being in the moment of the ceremony or in the workings of the initiation. And so again, we're going to definitely have what I've just been talking about show up in terms of that nervous system tension, but this is something that we can choose into as well, a very intentional act that is going to create I'd say a profound expansion of what we're able to hold. It really is a kind of calling in of more. I'm now ready to hold and be more power. And at this ceremony, this initiation is me calling that in. And what I've found over and over again is it happens exactly like that. Again, to such a profound degree, it's actually, I would say, beyond my own understanding of how it quite works and the way it does, but it does work. Okay, what next? So not leaking it. So we're talking about this idea that we can see this, whether we're talking about it in terms of, I don't know, water, maybe. A similar thing applies, like all of these ideas apply when we're looking at a kind of physical flow of something, or we're talking about energy in the way that we are. And similarly, there is, like we can cultivate it, but if we're then constantly leaking it, we're going to be losing it all the time, obviously. So part of cultivating energy is to let go of what allows it to leak, what allows it to drain out of you. Someone in the pre-show party mentioned about being around other people who are projecting shadow onto those around them. For some people, they're very sensitive to that. Another person talked about the human design having open energy centers. If you're someone who is sensitive to other people's energy, that can very much be something that then drains yours. That isn't true for me. I can be around just the worst energy ever, and it really doesn't seem to affect me in that same kind of way. But for many people, that's not true. So really notice, is that one of the ways that for you is an energy drain? I think for many, we can notice that we can be with more. Going back to what I was saying earlier about that expansion of our nervous system, as we grow in power, we are less likely to be affected by other people's energy. And some of us are just designed to be more sensitive to other people's energy. It's part of our gift. As I say, that's not actually true for me, but I know for some, they are part of their gift is that deep empathy, being really affected by how other people are feeling, how other people are showing up. So that is something to really be aware of if that's true for you. The next thing is using the energy you've got, the energy that you've, and again, I say got as if it's a finite source. It isn't, is a constant flow, but ultimately you've got what's available to you. And if you're using that in unaligned ways, you're obviously going to have less of it available for things you actually want to do, i.e. being a full expression of yourself. So some of the ways that we can use it that aren't aligned are, and again, very, very common in this modern world, but is things like gossiping, complaining, consuming things that aren't particularly life affirming, whether that be things on social media, whether that be things on the news. I've shared before that I don't consume the news at all in any form. And that's been the case for, I don't know how long, decades, I think. And again, very, very conscious choice on my part, because I wouldn't even say it's a particular energy drain for me. I'm not someone who generally has much of an issue with energy drain, but I would say it just isn't somewhere that I want to actually put my energy. For others, I actually think it has an even more draining effect. So that's something to be really conscious of. The ways that you're spending your energy are clearly ways you're spending your energy, but then certain places that you're putting it are in themselves a drain. And again, for a lot of people, the news is certainly a drain. Getting into Facebook debates and arguments is probably one of the most common drains of energy that I'm seeing lately. And it's so interesting. It's funny because I literally never do that. And then I kind of did once in the last month, and it was completely unintentional, in terms of like, it wasn't in my intention to have an argument. That's what I mean. But it certainly could have looked like an argument from the outside. And it was a real reminder to me of, yeah, this doesn't feel great. I know why I never do this. And I certainly won't be choosing to do this again. But so that's really rare for me. There was a reason I did it, and I don't actually regret the reason I did it, but it's certainly not something I'm planning to do more of. And it's, of course, a very it's kind of something that can really hook people. It can be very habitual and very addictive. But my invitation to you is just be, it's not to say it's never aligned, it's never going to serve. For some people that actually could be. I'm thinking of my friend Johnny Bowden, who I did a podcast with a month or so ago. I think for him, I'm not saying getting into Facebook arguments is aligned, but certainly being willing to have debates, have conversations about the things he's posting about, I think is actually, I suspect, not just not a drain for him. I would actually say it's probably a way that he is available for more energy. That's certainly not going to be true for everyone, and it's certainly not going to be true for all kinds of Facebook arguments and debates, even if it is aligned for you. So that's, I'd say, for a lot of people, really real easy win is to notice whether you're just doing something kind of thoughtlessly for the sake of it, or if it's actually serving you. The last one, and I probably could give so many examples of ways that people leak energy, but I'm just trying to focus on some of the main ones I see. Sorry, the dogs are moaning in the background. The next one is, actually spoke about this at length on last week's podcast about the victim triangle. The number one way that we leak energy, I would say, is by giving it away, literally giving our power away by blaming others for our lives. The moment we don't take responsibility for our own experience, our own life, and we make other people responsible for that, blame other people for that, we are giving away our power. It isn't possible for us to have our energy as our energy to use in conscious ways if we are saying, no, the power belongs out there. Can you see it doesn't make any sense at all? There's no way we can give our power to someone else to have over our lives and have it at our use. We've given it to them. They've got it now. And so that is, it's of course something that is really understandable that we do. The conditioning we've received in this culture and many people's wounding will make that something that shows up over and over and over again. And as we integrate shadow and as we become very, very conscious of the ways that we do that, we absolutely can change that. And certainly notice, like really recognize when we're in the act of that, not beat ourselves up for it. And again, I would really recommend, if you haven't already listened to the Victim Triangle podcast last week, go listen to that afterwards, because that will talk about this in a lot more detail. But this is really about bringing loving awareness to the ways that we do that, and then recognizing we have a choice not to do that, and actually to have our power in the place that we can actually use it, which is in here, not out there with other people. And of course, we can do that on other people who are in our, family or our friendship group. We can project it out onto, random other people in our Facebook circle, or we can project it out onto, I don't know, the government or some other group of people that we see are taking from us, and are not taking from us, we are actually giving it to them. So again, I've talked about this in a very kind of brief way, and it's very easy to take what I've said and think I'm saying something completely different. So if what I'm saying is triggering you and you want to know more about it rather than just think that I'm being horrendous and wrong, go check out that podcast last week, because that will definitely help you understand what I'm actually saying. Okay, how am I doing for time? Gosh, okay, so this is this has been longer than I imagined. So, assuming you've been looking, again, all of these are things that you're going to be simultaneously in the work of. I'm not expecting you to work your way through this like a checklist, but assuming you're in the work of becoming that open channel for your energy, expanding your capacity to hold more, doing the work to let go of the ways that you're leaking it, now you've cultivated all of this energy that we're talking about here, that you can then use to become the full expression. Now that is really, I'm just pausing for a moment, because it feels like however I say this, it doesn't quite capture the enormity of what that allows you to do. But that really is the opportunity you now have to use that energy, choose to use it in ways that are aligned to your soul. And that in itself becomes this sustainable source of energy. Someone shared in the pre-show party, let me see if I can find this quickly. She said, connecting to heart to see that deeper energy living me and guiding me. And then another one, love equals oxytocin, living from head is stress. That's what I've noticed over and over again. When we start to make choices to use the energy that we have available in ways that are aligned to us, it becomes this beautiful, sustainable flow. It doesn't feel anymore like we have got this kind of finite amount to use in a day, use it here, it's gone. I then need to do something to kind of bring it back. And then I've got another. It really does feel that we are simultaneously expending it, expressing it into the world, and then also open for more to come. That's what I've noticed both personally and with all the people that I work with, that we get much more of this beautiful, sustainable flow of energy as we're using it in soul aligned ways. So, of course, that requires us taking that aligned action. I've done many shows before about things like living from soul, being sovereign. All of these apply. It's ways that we are guided internally by what is for us, our truth, that higher self, that soul that wants to come through us as an expression. The more we are taking those choices, taking aligned action, that is how we become that full expression. Again, how we become this just like a sustainable energy machine, which doesn't sound the most soulful way of putting it, but hopefully makes sense. The other thing I really notice is when we are living in that way, when we are living in a soul aligned way, is a little bit of expending energy goes a really long way. So people constantly say to me, I'm someone who actually just has a lot of energy anyway, always have, but people are often saying to me how productive I am, how much I create, and the fact that I always seem so energetic. The interesting thing is I'm actually a very, I guess, relaxed person. Although I'm very energetic, I'm not particularly wired and hyper. And I actually relax and rest a lot. Not because I need it, but just because that's for me how I live in this soulful ways. I spend a lot of time dreaming in bed. I spend a lot of time in the bath. I spend a lot of time wandering in the wild. I spend a lot of time in ceremony and rituals, I said earlier. And I can very much afford to spend a lot of time, and I do mean a lot of time, doing those things, because when I then do bring my energy into creating things into the world, it's kind of like the full force of my power is focused there. So then what that creates in terms of impact is often way beyond what looks like it should have had. So as an example, we fill all of our programs, Wake in the Wild, effortlessly. We'll do the kind of go through the usual sort of, putting it on the podcast. I'll write a few posts. It certainly doesn't have this kind of big planned out marketing campaign. And often we've kind of filled the spaces before we've even quite got together to actually do anything particularly formal in terms of marketing. And it looks to me, there's several different reasons for that, but a lot of it's just when we are able to put that aligned energy into our creations, that power is able to then ripple out into the world in a way that is way beyond something. If we were to do something that's not aligned for us in an unaligned way, it is very unlikely to have that same degree of impact. And that's what I've noticed more and more, that if we are doing things that are aligned, if we're using energy in aligned ways, a little goes a very long way. Okay, is there anything else I want to say? Let me just have a quick sip of my water and ponder if there's anything else I want to share. I'm going to answer a couple of questions that were asked in the pre-show party. One was, why do kids seem to have more energy? And I don't honestly know. I'm going to share what seems clear to me, but there's probably it's probably biological reasons as well that I'm not even going to get into. But it seems to me that it's because children are already living to a large extent in the way that I've just been talking about. They are to a large extent already wild. They haven't had that degree of conditioning and wounding and using their energy in unaligned ways, leaking it, that most adults do. And so it's not necessarily that they've got more, it's more that what they've got, they're already using in many of the ways that I've just been talking about. So for me, it makes perfect sense. It's like, well, if we're not doing the things that would squish the channel that we have available for energy, of course, we would have all the energy that they have got. So that seems clear to me. And again, there is definitely some biological aspects to that in terms of, children probably need more energy to be able to grow. But I do think that us being able to retain that vibrancy, that energy that children have, is perfectly doable if, again, we're doing all the things that I talked about earlier, or not doing the things that are going to make it leak. The next question was, how can we cultivate energy whilst ill? Is there a way to help recover quicker by the cultivation of energy? Now, this is something I was pondering about whether to get into, and I've run a bit short on time, but very briefly, when I talked about living in aligned ways at the beginning, about those primal needs and those individual needs, part of that I see is living in ways that align with natural cycles, both cycles out there in the world and then also cycles that are going on internally. And we really love to override cycles in our modern linear world. We're not interested generally in cycles at all. It's seen as a bit kind of out there for many people to even care about the cycles of the moon. And incredibly for me now, but it was true for me going back 10 years or so ago, for most women are just completely overriding their menstrual cycle, which is probably one of the most important cycles we can honor as women. So we're going to have all these different cycles happening for us all the time, including cycles where our energy naturally will dip. That could be because of illness, which could, of course, be something, a deeper manifestation of a cycle that we might not be aware of. And so it seems to me, the more we are able to live in alignment with all those different cycles that take in place, rather than making them wrong, rather than saying, okay, my energy is lower now. Mine is right now on the second day of my menstrual cycle, and my energy is lower than it normally is. And so instead of trying to fight through that, instead of trying to force my way through it, I've gone about my day much slower than I normally would. Same is going to be true if we're ill. If we allow ourselves to be with it, to honor it, to recognize right now there is a natural reason while energy is lower, likelihood is that next part of the cycle will come around and probably far quicker, and then we'll have the energy swing back up again. So I haven't got time to go really deep into that, but I'd say most of the time when we are in a kind of resistance to, if we're experiencing loads of energy, a lot of it's going to be exacerbated by a resistance to it, rather than alignment with whatever the cycle is that's in play at the time. Okay. So in terms of aligned actions, I would go through and just look at the different aspects I've talked about here in terms of what can you do to begin or continue doing the work of integrating shadow. What can you do in terms of living in ways that are alignment for you? How can you expand your capacity? I talked about nervous system training and choosing into initiations. How do you currently leak it? How can you let go of the things that you're doing that are draining your energy? And then lastly, when you have that cultivation of energy, how will you choose to use it in aligned ways? And of course, I would love to hear how you get on with all of that. Do share it on our Facebook group, because it just makes for such an interesting, juicy conversation, and everyone learns from each other when we do that. So I'd love to know what you are going to do as a result of listening to this show. So if you have enjoyed this and you want more of this Wake the Wild goodness, here's some things you can do. So the next Wake the Wild Crucible we've got coming up, I mentioned Wake the Wild Sovereign, which is starting later this month, but it's not any longer open for application. But we've got Wake the Wild Medicine, the second one. So Wake the Wild Medicine 2022. Beginning, I think it's going to be in February. We haven't started enrolling for that, but if you go check out our webpage for it, primalhappiness.co/medicine, there's lots and lots of resources on that particular one. We probably will be doing a webinar and all sorts of other things on it, but it likely will sell out. We've already got lots of interest. So if you know that you would like to register your interest to be one of the first people we come to have a conversation about it, it'd be really worth checking it out now. It's really for you sorry, the dogs are making a real racket in the background. It's really for you if you are what we call a magical one. And it may be that you don't know if you are or not. And that's why the resources on the page will be really helpful for you. But these people, and I'm one of them, are people that often have felt different, weird, have struggled to kind of like be in mainstream society. And it's because you are meant for something different. And so Wake the Wild Medicine is really discovering what that is, what that gift that you are is, what the medicine that you are is, and being able to express that into the world. So really, in short, giving the opportunity to do your soul work. So if that sounds like you, go and have a look, and you can register your interest. And then once we open for enrollment, which I think will be probably a little bit later this month, we can then arrange to have a conversation with you to explore whether if indeed it is aligned for you. What else? So if you are watching this on Facebook or on YouTube and you haven't listened to our podcast, my goodness, there's so many episodes. We're up to 400 and something, I think. Maybe it's 300 and something. I don't know. It's a lot. That's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. If you are not a member of our Facebook group, I've mentioned it a number of times, It's a glorious group full of people on this path. And of course, you can join me for next month's pre-show party. And that's at facebook.com/group/primal-happiness. And if you are not on our Moonly newsletter subscription list, you are missing out. It's a really fabulous newsletter. It's curated by our very own Sarah, and it pulls together all sorts of things that we've been up to, programs we've got on offer, just, you know, a myriad of things. And Sarah's Moonly ritual, because we send it out in the full moon and the new moon, and each time Sarah includes a moon ritual, which is one way that you can align with cycles. And you can sign up for that if you haven't already got it at primalhappiness.co/moonly. That's MOONLY. I think that'll do. I think I've given you enough to get on with. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Lots of love. Mwah. Bye-bye.